Hey y'all, I made a Facebook post a couple days ago just asking people about techniques and baits that they struggle with, and one that I saw a lot of was crankbaits. And ironically, crankbaits is probably one of my favorite things to throw. I fish crankbaits a lot. If you watch my tournament vlog, you've seen me fish crankbaits, and just about every one of them. There's two baits that you see me throw a lot: a spinnerbait and a crankbait. Well, I'm gonna show you how to fish a crankbait. It's really not as complicated or as intimidating as it may seem. Depending on where you live, you know, maybe a crankbait ain't the best answer for where you live or the body of water you fish. But I want to show you what to look for, the situations, the conditions, and the structure that you want to look for if you do want to fish a crankbait. Certain situations it's hard to beat, okay? Today we're going to talk about the context of the crankbaits. There's a lot of different crankbaits from 1 foot to 20 foot. If you don't have a lot of confidence in a crankbait, it's probably a good idea to start off with one like this. This is what they call a square bill crankbait. If you look at it, they call it a square bill because guess what? The bill, the plastic that makes it dive down and have the action, is square. So that's why I call it a square bill. The purpose of the square bill crankbait is it comes through structure a lot better. It won't hang up as bad. You can make it come across rocks. You can make it come across wood and laydowns, and it just has a tendency to ricochet off of the structure and not snag as badly. So if you don't have a lot of confidence, that's good. Not getting hung up tends to make you a little bit more patient with the bait. Since it is a shallow diving crankbait, you can fish it around visual targets, you can fish it in ponds, you can fish it around places where most of your largemouth bass live. So I feel like you're gonna have more confidence in it because you're fishing in a higher percentage places. So I think it's a good place to start. Hard to mess up on it. Most of the gear that you already have will work for a square bill crankbait. Now, some of the gear that I have is a little bit more specialized because I'm crazy about cranking. But you can probably throw a square bill on just about any type of rod, reel combo that there is out there, and it probably doesn't matter, okay? So use what you have. Don't go out and just buy a whole bunch of stuff just yet. Just get you a square bill crankbait. Get one on the smaller size. This is a Scamp 60. Fish are typically eating shad and crawdads and brim that are about that big, and that's exactly what size that crankbait is. All right, and like I said, most of your equipment's going to hold up for that. So I'm sure you're probably curious about what kind of rod, reel, line combo. That's what everybody wants to know about. We're looking for something to buy. All right, I'm gonna give it to you right here. So I made a rod specifically for cranking. I made 2 graphite composite rods. It's the blat signature series and the 6-stick at Favorite. They're both graphite composite rods. It's a 610 that I made for crankbaits like what we're gonna throw today. It's very light in the tip. The reason it's light in the tip is because you can see with the square bill, they all have treble hooks, and fish have a tendency to kind of slap at the bait, not get it in their mouth really good. And so when you've got a fish just one of these little treble hooks, skin hook, you want a rod that's pretty soft so when he goes to make a surge, you don't pull that hook out of his mouth. Almost always, I'm very simple, you know, in my gear. 12 to 15 pound test fluorocarbon. I'd rather you use mono than braid. Forget about braid. Don't ask me why you need to forget about braid. Just don't come out here throwing the square bills and the crankbaits on braid. That's all you need to know. Let's not make that complicated. Fluorocarbon or mono, 12 to 15 pound test. With a square bill, you can get away with 15 pound tests. You're gonna be making such short casts that the line resistance is just not gonna make that big a difference. I like to use a fairly slower reel, 6/8 to 1 gear ratio reel. Today I got a Pro TI on that I've had geared down to a 6/8 to 1. The Pro TI actually doesn't come into a 6/8 to 1 gear ratio reel. I had a friend that gave me one because I like a higher end reel for this, because I think you have a lot of impact on your reel because you're throwing it out and clicking over just thousands of times through the course of the day. So I like a higher end reel. 13 Fishing has a lot of reels in the higher gear, in the lower gear ratios, and the high end reels. The Inception's a good reel that I've used quite a bit. Concept A, Concept Z, they're all good reels that you can use at a good price point that'll meet whatever you got. I talked about the rod. 6/8 I wouldn't use much for a square bill, not much more than a 7-footer. Just use whatever you got right now. You don't even know what you're doing, so don't get too much into gear. Just find you some fish at this point. The conditions that you fish the bait around are way more important than all this stuff. Use what you got. Once you get proficient in using the bait and what to look for, then you come back and get your Blat Signature Series 610 graphite composite rod and the 6-stick series and the 6:8-to-1 gear ratio reels in the perfect line. Once you figure out how to use the bait, you don't even know what you're doing yet, so don't worry about all that. What else we need to know? That's really all. I got your rod 6'8" to 7 foot. Your line 12 to 15 pound test. Go 10 if you're really good with a rod and reel, but you're being not that confident in the bait, use 12 to 15. Use something a little stronger. Slower gear ratio reel. That's it. That's all I got for you. Now let's go talk about the conditions, what you want to fish around, what you want to look for, how to retrieve the bait, which is the reason you clicked on this video to start with. All right, the reason I like the square bill, especially if you haven't started off fishing if you haven't no confidence in fishing a crankbait, the square bill doesn't hang up quite as bad, so you don't need quite as much coaching on how to bring it across structure, around rocks. And since it's a shallow diving plug, you can fish it around visual targets, and that's going to give you some confidence on what to look for. It's going to be hard for me to tell you how to fish a bait in 7-8 foot of water and things that you can't actually see if you don't know how to fish the bait around visual targets that you actually can see. If you look over here, I'm fishing around laydowns. I'm fishing underhanging banks, places like that. Now, what I really like to fish the square bill around, or really any kind of crankbait, if I see rocks, that's probably my favorite thing to fish any kind of crankbait around, but especially a square bill. Anytime I've got rip-rap rocks, chunk rock, a bluff wall, if there's rocks, pick up the crankbait. It'll be, I don't know why that combination works good, but it just works really good. But today the context is just fishing it around these laydowns, logs. It might even be just some bank transitions where it goes from shallow to deep pretty fast, or mud banks. But what I want you to focus on right now is how to get the bait to do what you want it to do. You can really manipulate a crankbait to stay up high or get down a little bit deeper with what you do with the rod tip and what you do with how fast you reel the bait. And that's what I'm just going to kind of talk you through right now, as well as how not to hang up, or hang up a little less. That's something else that people struggle with crankbaits. So on this part, that's exactly what I'm going to talk to you about. What I like to do, I'm going to cast it out. If I'm fishing laydowns, I'll just cast out my structure. If I'm fishing even just a do nothing bank that seemingly doesn't have any structure on it, maybe it just has a contour with flat, and it drops off, that's a good place to fish a crankbait too. I cast the bait out, I'm gonna cast it out like that. We always talk about a stop and go retrieve with a crankbait. So you're gonna throw it out and just let it stop. Throw it out, let it stop. The reason you're doing that is because a lot of times what a fish is doing, I'll show you, this bait has rattles in it, so it makes some noise. It makes some noise, as well as the vibration. That's the attention factor with the square bill. The noise and the fact that it vibrates. The reason you're throwing it out, letting it stop, and then going, is that fish is going to be tracking that bait, and a lot of times when you stop it, he's right behind it, you stop it, and it gets the reaction and make him bite it. Okay, that's one reason that you're going to do it. The second reason is just to get the noise factor to do something different. So, you know, it's rattling, it's tick, 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 tick. You stop it, that inconsistency in the noise sometimes is why you get a bite. You don't just throw this bait out and just mindlessly throw it and wind it back to the boat. I see people, they just wind. In the same way that you feel a plastic worm back to the boat, just imagine throwing out a plastic worm and just reeling it back to the boat. You wouldn't catch many fish doing that. The same thing goes for a crankbait. When I throw it out, I'm literally trying to feel what the bait is doing. You really have to be mindful of feel how it's vibrating. Feel if it's running into the bottom. Feel if you're not hitting the bottom. Feel if it's vibrating hard or slow. You really need to feel what the bait is doing. So many people just reel it out and throw it out, reel it back to the boat, and just the mind's not even on what's going on. You really got to just kind of, I like to use the term, even when I'm not fishing around rocks, you're counting rocks with it. Like, imagine if you were trying to count how many rocks the bait's coming across, you'd really be paying attention. Okay, 1, 2, all right, felt like 1, 3, 4. You really want to feel the bait through whatever it's doing. You'll up your catches on a crankbait significantly if you'll just slow down and really think about, try to feel what that bait is doing while it's underwater. Feel it go over that lay down. Feel it go through the rocks. If you don't do that, a lot of times your bait may be fouled up, or you may not even be hitting the bottom and you're using the wrong crankbait. You may need to cast in towards the bank a little bit tighter. You might need to cast out from the bank a little bit further away, just so the bait does what it's supposed to. So you have to pay attention to what the bait is doing. Don't just throw it out and reel it back just to make a cast. Really try to feel what it's doing, feel the attitude of the bait, so you know if you need another bait, so you know if you need to slow down, speed up. That's what makes you a good crankbait fisherman. Vibration is the #1 factor in drawing a fish to a crankbait. Moving the water, because you got to think, the bait fish and the brim, the things that you're imitating with a crankbait, they don't just swim constantly. They swim a little bit and stop. If you ever watch bait, minnows in a tank, or if you even watch crawfish move, they move really fast and stop, move really fast and stop. So what you're trying to do is imitate the way that a natural forage fish would act. So that's another reason that you're gonna stop the bait. One of the other ways I like to work it is, you'll notice that I'll work it, and as I stop it, I'll actually kind of just pull the rod tip along a little bit too. All I'm trying to do is just get that reaction bite, make the bait do something different, make it deflect. If I'm just fishing it off the bottom, I just want it to scurry along a little differently. So that's why I'll change the cadence with the rod tip. And I can hold the rod tip a little bit higher, and when I'm fishing around a laydown, if I'm bringing it over the top of a log, or if I'm bringing it over the top of a rock, I'll raise the rod tip just a little bit like that, just to worm it through the structure. I don't want to just throw it out, and if I know my bait's about to come across that log right now, I don't want to keep the rod digging down. I don't want the bait to keep digging down in the structure. Squarebill is a pretty forgiving bait when you're fishing around structures. So what you do with the rod tip extremely affects the way the bait behaves. So if I wanted to get down a little deeper, I'll hold the rod tip down towards the water, just like that, and I'll just keep maintaining my reeling. Just keep maintaining, just keep pulling it, keep pulling it. Now, if I throw it out, and I see I'm coming up on a piece of structure, or if I feel it digging the bottom too much, all I'm going to do is just raise the rod tip and just continue the reel, just like that. And that bait won't dig down as deep, and it won't get hung. So just remember, you can manipulate and make the bait do whatever you want to by keeping the rod high, pushing it down low, stopping. A lot of times, most of your square bills are going to be floaters. And so if you get hung up, the first thing you need to do is just throw slack back at the bait, and it's going to let that bait rise up. The square bill is extremely buoyant bait, and a lot of times you can get it back if it's snagged just by giving some slack in it, because the bait's so buoyant it'll back out of whatever it's stuck on. So remember that when you're fishing a crankbait as well. Most of the time it's just a pretty steady cadence for me. My everyday let's go fishing, catch them on the square bill is going to be somewhere like that. Just reel it, reel it, reel it, reel it, stop, reel it, reel it, reel it, stop, get down on the reel right here. This is going to be my everyday cadence right there. It's going to be about that speed right there with a 6:8:1 gear ratio reel. And you'll notice when I feel it kind of bogging down in the mud, or if I feel like I got a leaf on it, I'll just pop the rod tip like that, just to get whatever's on it off. That's going to be my everyday retrieve. But there's days where you're going to want to reel it faster, because maybe there's clear water, there's fish feeding on shad, or you're just trying to get more reaction bite. You might speed it up a little bit more. See, I hung up that time. What I'm going to do, that's one way I'll try to get it done snagged, is I'll throw slack in it first to see if it'll bounce back out of there, if it'll back itself back out. If it doesn't, a lot of times I'll just leave the slack in there, hit my rod tip, and it's not working this time, but a lot of times it does. That is definitely a part of fishing a crankbait, is it's snagging. That's just gonna be a part of it. You're gonna get hung up. You got 2 treble hooks on a bait and you're fishing around wood, or if you're fishing around docks or laydowns, it's gonna snag up at some point. So you just gotta be prepared for that. Most of the time if I get snagged, I just reel it down to it, like that, and then pull it out. You just reel it down right on, reel your rod tip right down on top of the base of the bait, and then just pull it out. And you go right on back to fishing just like that. So just remember to be patient. If you fish on shore, sometimes crankbait ain't gonna be the best one to fish around laydowns because you're gonna hang up. That's one of the downsides from fishing from shore, is that you do hang up. If you hung up, you can't go get the bait. That's one of the great things about fishing out of a boat. You can always go get it. You can't do that from shore. Another thing to remember about a crankbait, most of the time a packaging on your crankbait is going to tell you how deep the bait goes. Typically I like to overshoot on my depth on crankbait. So if I know I'm fishing, today we're fishing 0 foot to maybe 3 foot is where our bites are going to come. I'm probably going to look for a crankbait that gets 3 to 5 foot deep. I want to overshoot how deep the crankbait goes for the water depth. So most of the time, there's some applications where you don't overshoot it. But if I'm fishing 5 to 6 foot of water, I probably want a crankbait that gets, 7, 8 foot deep, maybe even 10 foot deep. But I want to overshoot it. This is why. The depth on a crankbait, if it says this particular bait, the scamp, I want to say it says 1 to 3 foot on here. Let's look at, they write it right on the bill. This crankbait says, yeah, 1 to 3 foot. You can see they put the depth right on the bill of the bait there. Not sure if you can see it. That's the really cool thing about these. So I'm going to overshoot it. The reason I'm going to overshoot how deep the crankbait goes to my to the depth that I'm fishing in, that is based on basically a long cast. Like casting that bait out far as it'll go, bringing it back to the boat, it's going to get down about a maximum of 3 foot. If I cast it out, 70 foot. Well, you can see in this creek, I don't have 70 foot of depth to make a cast. I don't have that much between me and the bank. So I want to overshoot it because my bait doesn't have time on a short cast to reach that maximum depth. So even though I'm fishing maybe in 2 foot, 1.5 foot, I still want to get a bait that gets at least 3, 4 foot, because in that little bit of short cast right there, I need the bait to get down to its maximum depth pretty fast. So I'm going to overshoot it so I'm able to hit the structure. Fishing a crankbait is all about running it into whatever you're fishing. Running it into the bottom, running it into laydowns, running it into the rocks, the riprap. You almost always want to be running it into something. I think that's why I like it. It's constant stimulation. The bait's moving, you're constantly feeling what it's doing as you're fishing it back to the boat. Let's hit the color. I know that's going to be, everybody wants to know, what can I buy? What can I buy? What color? What color? What color? I don't get too much into colors with a square bill in particular. I think it has most to do with the fact that you're fishing it in stained water most of the time. If you're fishing a square bill, it's most of the time in stained water. I'm going to help you out and make this real simple for you. Get something with the white sides and a dark back, white and black, white and blue, something white sides, dark back. That needs to be one of the colors you get. Something with chartreuse sides and a dark back. This color is called Fire Tiger, or they may not call it Fire Tiger, but it's Fire Tiger to me. Chartreuse with a dark back, and then also get you something red. If you have those 3 colors, that's going to get you through just about any situation that you're going to come across where you want to throw a crankbait. Now you can go buy all the crazy and new colors, and I got them too, all right? But if you don't have any confidence in throwing a crankbait, you got to keep it simple. Chartreuse with dark back, white with dark back, and red with a dark back. That'll get you done, all right? Don't get caught up in colors with this particular technique. I hope that helps you. If you have never fished a crankbait before, if you'll just put it in your hand, go to the lake, go to your pond, go somewhere where you know you can catch some fish, where you got some shallow water, pick up your shallow water square bill like this one, and just start throwing it around. If you got rocks, I promise you there's a bass around rocks that'll hit a square bill crankbait. If you got laydowns like where we are now, don't be scared to throw it up in there. You're gonna get hang up a little bit, but they're easy to retrieve back. They're shallow diving crankbaits, so you almost always can get to them.